Right now, joining us, he is the senior editor-at-large at Breitbart News, Joel Pollak. A lot of people don't know this about Joel. He was born in South Africa, came here to America as a child, but then went back to South Africa right after Nelson Mandela's presidency ended, right after his term ended. So he has a really keen insight into the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela. Joel Pollak, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Great to be with you guys.
So, Joel, so much is being said already about Nelson Mandela. I would love for you to sort of sum it up in a moment. Why is his legacy so important to us here in America?
Well, because he believed that the way forward was not radicalism and revolution, but reconciliation and individual rights.
Well, early in his career, he was a bit of a radical, wasn't he?
Right, and had he become president of South Africa at the younger age, he would have been a disaster because he was very drawn towards state ownership of everything and so forth. I mean, he still believed in racial equality, but essentially his economic theories, his idea of state power, South Africa would have looked very much like Zimbabwe does today. But when he went to prison and really had time to reflect, and then later when he negotiated with the apartheid government, he came out and emerged as a figure of reconciliation. He forgave a lot of the things that had happened to him, and he also dropped a lot of the radical demands that he had made earlier in his life for the sake of building a liberal democracy, liberal small L, democracy small d. In other words, more or less what we enjoy here, society of laws, of individual liberties, and government constrained by a constitution.
He's being called an icon of peaceful resistance. But talk about this forgiveness of which you speak. I mean, he was in prison for 27 years, and then he came out and forgave his oppressors. I don't know many people who had been kept in prison for 27 years, largely because of the color of his skin and because of apartheid, and then yet he's able to forgive those people.
He understood that was the only way to build the nation. That was, the big fear of the ANC once they realized the apartheid government was collapsing was that there would be nothing left once they came to power. So they understood they had to build a foundation not just for the country's economic future, but for its political and social future. And there were certainly some in the ANC who wanted revenge and who wanted massive redistribution by the state and who wanted, aggressive affirmative action laws. And you saw a little bit of that, even under Mandela. I mean, the affirmative action laws that South Africa passed under his presidency really debilitated not just the country in some respects, but, took the best teachers out of the schools and so forth. But he resisted most of that. I mean, not 100%, but he did resist most of it. And symbolically, at least, made white South Africans feel that they had a place in a new black-led South Africa. And I think that ensured the country's future. But one thing I just want to mention, you said that he was an icon of passive resistance. He did start out in the Martin Luther King mold of nonviolent resistance, but when his party met with massive reaction by the state, he then rejected nonviolence and started a violent movement that went alongside that, and that's the reason he ended up in prison, was they started a campaign of sabotage and bombings and things like that. It was a decision fraught with moral difficulty and so forth. But a lot of people would say that was probably inevitable given the way South Africa was governed at the time. Our forefathers in this country started a violent revolution when Britain wouldn't listen. But the real, I think, problematic part of his career, because he's got a very complex legacy, came when he joined that violent wing with an alliance with the Soviet Union, and that may have set him back a decade or more, because the Soviets were really the evil empire at the time, and that meant that the Reagans and Thatchers of the world, who otherwise supported an end to racial discrimination, couldn't openly support Mandela's movement because they just could not support anything aligned with the Soviet Union.
Joel Pollak is our guest. He's editor-at-large at Breitbart News, and we're talking about the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela, who passed away yesterday afternoon. And, of course, the inevitable comparisons over on MSNBC to Barack Obama, they started happening within minutes of the the news that Nelson Mandela had died. And get this, Joan Walsh said that Obama models his career after Mandela and turns the other cheek too much. He's too inclined to reconciliation. Do you see in Barack Obama the same kind of courageous reconciliation with his political opponents that you see in Nelson Mandela?
No, not at all. In fact, I would draw several contrasts between Obama and Mandela. One of them is that lack of reconciliation. When Mandela came to office, South Africans were deeply divided along lines of race. When he left office, South Africans were broadly united. And today in South Africa, you find there's a great deal of unity among people of different races. The only real disunity exists among politicians who like to divide people for their own purposes. Mandela left South Africa more united. Obama will leave America when he leaves office more divided. So that's a huge difference.
Joel Pollak, I know you still have family back, and we're almost out of time. You have family. In fact, you have your in-laws are still back in South Africa. What is the mood like there? Are you going to be going back for the funeral? And what do we expect in the next couple of days in recognition of this passing?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. We were actually planning a family trip anyway for the December holidays. So I'm going to be there next week anyway. So I'll be able to get a sense of the mood of the country. I can tell you this, some of my in-laws worked very closely with him and knew him personally, and they have mixed feelings about his passing because although they're sad and they appreciated the great man, they also feel that his political party has gone so far astray from his ideals, and that South Africa today is becoming a more statist, more radical, and less united place than it was when he was in office.
Joel Pollak, so great to have you. Thank you for joining us. I know it's early, you're on the West Coast, but thank you for being here with us. Joel Pollak from Breitbart News. He's just your typical American conservative. He's an Orthodox Jew, born in South Africa, married to a mixed-race South African national with a Harvard law degree. Just your typical American conservative, Joel Pollak.
Well, good to have him on the show.